Hey everyone, I'm Joe. Today it's time for me to do my reading wrap up for October 2018. But before I get to the books, I just want to make one point, and that is this is the first video I've done in a month, 4 weeks in fact today, and that last video was my reading wrap up for September. The reason for this is quite simply that I lost all inspiration and all motivation to make videos during October. Every time I went to make a video, I just didn't feel as though I was in the right frame of mind, and I just also ran out of ideas, and I just felt totally unmotivated to make them. Obviously, as this video is proof, I am now interested in doing videos again, so there will be videos like normal in the coming weeks. Anyway, let's get on talking about books. The first of which is Then in the Art of Writing by Ray Bradbury. This is a very thin book. This is non-fiction, and this is Ray Bradbury, who's well known for various other extremely popular and much loved books, of which I indeed do love myself. It's him writing various little articles and essays and such over the course of many different years and different points in his life, and this is a culmination of those articles and essays. It's just him. Some of it is sort of advice, I suppose you could think of it, but not really. Most of it's just the way he thinks of writing and the way he approaches it, and his enthusiasm for writing, frankly, is the thing that's most evident about this. He loved writing. I mean, truly loved writing. It was what made him feel alive every single day of his life, and you can tell that from when he did talks and stuff, which you can Google on and such, and look on YouTube for it. This is him writing down little essays and such. Really interesting. If you don't like Ray Bradbury, obviously this won't be interesting to you, but it's just fascinating to read, and I really thoroughly enjoyed this, because yes, I'm not planning to be a writer, but it's still very interesting because the way he talks about it is frankly great. The second book is also by Ray Bradbury, and that is We'll Always Have Paris. This is a science fiction short story collection. It has 4 or 5 short stories in it. I can't remember how many off the top of my head, and frankly, as it is short stories, I don't want to say too much about them individually, because obviously I'll give away the plot and the ideas of the short stories. Suffice to say, this is Ray Bradbury doing what he does best and what he loved to do, which was write short stories. He wrote so many short stories over the course of his life. It is frankly almost unparalleled within literature. I mean, he really was iconic for his short stories. He wrote hundreds upon hundreds of them that actually were published, thousands upon thousands that were unpublished. It's actually well known that he wrote that many. And this is just a small sample of a few of them, one that he particularly liked. It does have a foreword by him, written slightly more recently than most of the short stories were written. And this is basically, again, like Then in the Art of Writing. If you like Ray Bradbury and you like his fiction, then you will like this, because this is just a brilliant little collection of short stories. It could be a good place to start with him as well, rather than reading one of his slightly longer novels, although most of his novels are relatively short by today's standards. You could start with this, or indeed any of his short story collections, because they're all easy to pick up and read, and none of them deal with really, highly technical subjects or anything. They're just interesting sort of slice of life type ideas, often with really nice and beautiful writing, of which I really highly approve. Next up, I've read something completely different from that, and that is the Border Trilogy by Cormac McCarthy. This trilogy comprises Cities of the Plain, The Crossing, and finally All the Pretty Horses. I think I've actually shown them in the wrong order, but regardless, this is a really interesting trilogy. It is fiction. It is classed as Western, and that is Western as in the Wild West, cowboys and such in America. All 3 books are rather interesting because the name of the trilogy is the Border Trilogy, as I said, and indeed that is because the setting of it is on the American side of the border with Mexico. In the first book, it deals with a young man who goes off on an adventure, let's say, and he ends up going into Mexico and gets into trouble because of his personality, basically, and things happen. The second book is vaguely similar in some ways. This time it focuses on an unrelated young man who, along with his brother, also ends up going into Mexico due to circumstances I'm not going to talk about, and they have certain adventures, let's say, due to personality conflicts and such. You know, the way they think of the world is different from how the world actually is, because this is a harsh world, especially near the Mexico border. And then the third book focuses on both of those two main characters from the first and second books, minus the one character's brother. And this third book is an interesting one because I liked the first book, I quite liked the second book. I didn't overly like the third book because the books felt... I liked the books, I liked the writing, and I'll talk about the writing in a minute, but it felt as though less went on as the books went on, which felt strange because the first book was a bit more action packed, second less so, and the third not much happened, which is strange. And to come back to what I said about the writing, Cormac McCarthy, some people hate his writing. I think it's interesting. I don't love it, however. And the reason that some people have issues with it is because he seems to essentially do as he pleases with regards to punctuation and grammar. In particular, in the first book, there basically isn't really any punctuation and grammar as such. You know, the way characters speak, and indeed the way the words they use, whilst it may be accurate to the actual time, when you're looking at it from a purely written perspective, it looks like essentially what you'd always call poor English. You see, things are spelled shorthand, there's no apostrophes, and it looks like it's poorly written. It's not, because I think McCarthy, from what I can tell, is trying to get across the idea that these characters are indeed sort of more rough and ready. They themselves don't, if they were to write this, they wouldn't know how to do that kind of writing and that kind of English. So it's reflecting them as people, not necessarily the author, which I think is an interesting stance. Not one I entirely agree with, because at times it does get annoying when, like the first book, there's no real chapters in it, or even paragraphs to a large degree. It just sort of keeps going and going and going in vast sections, which at times can be kind of annoying actually, especially when you're trying to find a place to actually stop so you can go and do something else. But they are well written, interesting ideas, and they're not necessarily for everybody, but I do think they are interesting books, and they are worth reading. If they sound interesting to you, then I would recommend them. Next up, I read Clans of the Alphane Moon by Philip K. Dick. Now, as you may know, if you've watched my other wrap-ups from this year, I read quite a lot of books by Philip K. Dick this year, and for the most part, most of them haven't worked out too well for me, frankly. Less than half of them have actually a lot less than half. This is one of the very few Philip K. Dicks this year that I've actually read that I've actually enjoyed, although I still didn't love it, but it is better than most of them that I've read this year. Now, the title refers to, there is a moon in a system called the Alphane system, and the clans of that moon are not clans in a feudal sense. They are referring to the fact that this moon was actually a sort of psychiatric facility, rather than making just a single building for it on a planet or moon somewhere. They essentially dedicated an entire moon for psychiatry and for dealing with people with severe psychological issues of various kinds. They started using this moon as that. However, after a certain amount of time, they essentially abandoned this moon, and indeed all the people that were there, the inmates, as some people refer to them in the book, were just left, and they basically sort of took over and had to fend for themselves, and they formed clans based on their sort of general psychological issues. Like, for instance, there is the depths, which are short for depressive, and that obviously covers a wide range of things within that particular psychological sort of spectrum. There are people who are called the manics. They are obviously the manic depressives, and indeed a larger spectrum around that. And there are multiple other sort of factions. They all kind of work together, and this is essentially a story where the main character, who is from another system, he essentially sort of has to go there and deal with them for reasons I'm not going to go into, because it would be more interesting if you don't know, because I didn't know, and I actually found it far more interesting, and I'm glad I didn't know anything very much about it. Suffice to tell that it deals with psychological issues, which Philip K. Dick is known for. I mean, frankly, he had certain psychological problems himself, and drug addictions as well, which the book also deals with. I mean, frankly, Philip K. Dick books generally are psychological and normally have drugs in them. This book has both. Frankly, that is what Philip K. Dick, that's his sort of signature move. He does do it well in the book. It's not exactly the easiest book ever to read, but if it sounds like your sort of thing or sounds interesting, then it is well worth reading, because I personally think this is one of the better Philip K. Dicks I've read in some time. Probably not the best this year, but certainly up amongst the top 3, I expect. Next up is a science fiction masterwork by one of the Yellow Spines, and that is Star Maker by Olaf Stapledon. Now, this is quite a weird concept for a book, because the whole book is essentially a giant world building exercise, essentially, which sounds strange, and I will explain. The book starts out with the main character, whose name I have forgotten, and frankly it doesn't matter because it's almost irrelevant what his name is. He is outside of his house one day. He's got a very clear sky, and he's looking up at big stars and thinking about his place, and indeed humanity's place and Earth's place within the greater solar system and universe, and about life itself. And he suddenly finds himself becoming incorporeal, in other words, without a physical body, and it's just his mind, his consciousness starts to suddenly accelerate away from Earth without his control at first, and it's just him, always consciousness, going at high speed throughout the solar system and then throughout the greater universe in general, and coming across other worlds and other alien civilizations, and he's just observing things and sort of recounting them as best he can after the events of the book happen. And it's a strange concept because it is purely world building. There's no real plot. I mean, there's no real action because there's no greater sort of cause for him to do this. He's not trying to solve some sort of universal war or anything like this. He's just observing the universe existing and happening and taking place, and he interacts with certain other alien cultures as well in his own rather strange way, because he needs an incorporeal consciousness. He just still manages to interact in certain ways, and I like the concept. I didn't love the book that much. I mean, it was curious, and my main thought is that there is no way a book like this could be published today at all. You wouldn't, at least traditionally published. No publisher would publish this because it is a giant world building exercise that Stapledon did, and it became quite a big world building exercise. I mean, obviously universal in scope, and you couldn't do that today. Publishers wouldn't be interested in this. So it's an interesting concept, I think, and indeed I am very glad I read this, because for that reason, it's a strange and unusual concept, not one that I ever think you'll ever see again to any great degree. And to be honest, I don't know of any other book I've ever heard of other than this that has a concept like this, where it's just pure world building, no characters, no plot, just a world, or in this case a universe, and different worlds within it, and just looking at alien civilizations and alien species and how they exist within their different ecosystems and such. It's strange, but I don't know, I do like it, but I kind of didn't. It's hard to say. It's just good for the concept and well worth reading, frankly. I then read After Atlas by Emma Newman. This is the second book in the Planetfall series. I have read the first book and I've read the third book already, and indeed I did separate reviews of those. I am unsure if I will do a separate review of this, but I may well do that, especially now that my inspiration and motivation for making videos is now returned. I'll see what I can manage. This focuses on the main character, whose name is Carlos Marina, or Carl as he's otherwise known. He has a very strange job as such because he is an indentured detective. Basically, he's a detective but he doesn't really want to be, because essentially he has been sort of contracted out because he owes money and he has to do this job, otherwise they can just do anything they want with him. Basically, they can just stop feeding him and he'll starve to death. And this is completely legal in this world, that other people doing these indentured works. It's not exactly slavery, obviously, but it's a strange concept, one that does work and creates a very interesting dynamic, because he takes the lead in a murder that takes place as a lead detective, and it's a big deal, this murder is, because it's a very significant world figure, and indeed does link heavily to the Planetfall idea, of which is one that is in all three books, and indeed there will be more books in this universe, and about this idea of this Planetfall event, which is the Atlas shuttle, which was a colonization attempt to go to other world. It left a gap where people didn't know where it went, but they left instructions on how to follow them, and it's very strange and also surreal at times, but extremely well written. The main character and indeed his supporting characters all work together in a rather strange way because of the indentured nature of him. You know, he's a lead detective, he's got a lot of power, but he's kind of a slave in some senses. So it's strange that, you know, he's sort of both, you know, he's leading people, but he's also has to bow down and do what other people say without fail, otherwise they can just literally not give him food and he'll starve. Strange, but it does work, and I really did enjoy this. I may well do a separate review, so I'm not going to say too much more now. But if you've read the first book, Planetfall, then you'll probably like this. This is a very interesting thriller that has science fiction elements to it, with great characters and great world building. The penultimate book that I read was A Symphony of Echoes by Jodi Taylor. Now this is the second book in the Chronicles of St. Mary's series. This series is either 9 or 10 books long. I think the 10th book was released earlier this year. I could be mistaken, it could have been the 9th, but it's around 9 or 10. And this is an interesting series, and one that obviously I am going to be continuing with, where it is a science fiction time travel series essentially. This is a institute in England filled with historians, rather than just digging up, going to like archaeological digs, trying to unearth the past. That way, they have time travel machines basically, and they go back and observe and interact with the past directly. Obviously, the concept of paradoxes, you know, sort of killing your own grandfather, you know, the grandfather paradox, is dealt with in an interesting way, although only lightly, because it's always a very difficult one to actually solve. I mean, how can you solve it? There is no way you can solve that paradox as such. I mean, that's what it's a paradox. It deals with that and other concepts in an interesting way. The characters are quite interesting because they are historians. They always go back in the past, and whilst they may well be intelligent enough to actually go back in the past and observe these things, and indeed obviously somebody's intelligent enough to make time machines, they're kind of quite stupid in many ways as well, because they don't seem to think about what effect they will have on what they are observing. You know, what you observe, you change, and that's a well-known thing. So it's an interesting concept, and the characters are interesting because they're both highly intelligent and highly stupid, and that dynamic, which sounds strange, works extremely well because they all have their own personalities and they all interact in really interesting ways. And the story of this particular book, which I'm not going to talk about, it's more like the greater concept that I'm going to talk about with these. And at the end, once I'm up to date with all the books, I may well do an overall Chronicles of St. Mary's overview type video at the end, which will be probably 6 months from now. But this is a really interesting series, interesting ideas and good writing, and they are amusing as well. Got a lot of comedy in them, although they've got some remarkably dark moments in as well. So it's an interesting mixture of light, dark, comedy, seriousness, which I greatly enjoy. Finally, the last book that I read was Black Man by Richard Morgan. This is an award-winning book. I have a Goodreads group that I started nearly 2 years ago now, where I talk about various books that have won science fiction awards. Hugo, Nebula, Philip K. Dick, Arthur C. Clarke, and the Tiptree Awards. This indeed is obviously won one of them. This won the Clarke Award, I believe it was. Yep, I thought so. And the Philip K. Dick Award, in fact. Actually, I forgot that. Won two of them. This is an interesting concept because the main character is indeed a black man in terms of race. He's also a black man in terms of his sort of job, let's say. He's a genetically modified human known as a 13, and he is being employed by various large agencies to hunt down other 13s, other genetically modified humans. At the start of the book, a 13 comes down, or comes back, I should say, from Mars, where there is a colony, crash lands back on Earth. He escapes and survives, and basically he becomes a serial killer. And 13s are very unusual. Obviously, they are genetically modified. They were particularly focused on being sort of hunters and sort of predators almost. You know, they can do combat extremely well, but they can also find people. Hence why the main character is kind of a detective, essentially, tracking people down. That's what they were genetically modified to be sort of predisposed towards. All their characteristics, their personality traits, is that way inclined. This serial killer one is obviously gone a bit wrong, let's say, and he's now murdering people. Why? Yeah, obviously you got to read the book to find out. And it's just him trying to hunt down this other 13, this genetically modified person, and his interactions with not just the sort of, you know, the low life and the sort of criminal underworld, but also these sort of government entities that control him and telling him what to do. He has a partner for most of the book, and indeed a few other people that he has some pretty significant interactions with, who both like him for what he does, but also are afraid of him because 13s are obviously quite dangerous by themselves. I mean, one-on-one, they're basically unstoppable. I mean, you know, nobody can actually take them. They're like sort of like super soldier type ideas. And the one thing where I thought the book was let down, though, is the promise and the premise of the book is really interesting, but the book doesn't quite have enough time to actually delve into every aspect of what you'd hope to see. The ideas are fantastic, but there's not enough depth on any one particular subject. There's just about enough to cover it. I mean, it's not exactly a small book either, but still, you kind of want a little bit more on each subject, and there just isn't quite enough, which is a shame. I mean, not entirely unexpected. I mean, in some ways, you could almost say this needs to be part of a duology, although then the other major good point about this book is the pacing, which is absolutely excellent. It goes along at a fair rate most of the time, and then it has its quiet moments and its slow moments at times, which work extremely well. If this were indeed split into two books to cover all the subjects, the pacing wouldn't be there in the same way, because obviously it would then be drawn over two books. So it'd be completely different again. So it would be very hard to say whether this would work better or worse over a longer series of time. But I'm very glad I read it. It got some fantastic ideas. The writing is really, really strong. I will read more Richard Morgan in the future, probably next year, almost without the fail. And I'm very glad I read this, and I would recommend if you want something a little bit different, but keep in mind that it's not perfect. I don't think it's got flaws and some significant ones, but the redeeming features do redeem it just about enough, I think. So it's well worth reading, in my opinion. So that is it for everything that I read over the course of October. I read 10 books in total. They were all quite varied in content and style, also in quality. Some I liked, some I did not like at all, which is part of the course, frankly. You know, you'll always read brilliant books, you'll always read books that completely fail to work for you. If you've read any of these, or you indeed would like to, then please leave a comment and we can have a talk about them. I will leave any social media links as well as links to anything that I will review, if I may or may not have reviewed it by the point this video goes up, in the description box below. And with that said, that is it for this video. So thank you for watching and thank you for now. Bye for now.